All right, so the recording is on. It's Monday, February 13th, day after the Super Bowl. If you're sorry the Eagles didn't win, I guess I'm sorry too, but don't really care that much. This is the beginning of week 6. At about week 7.5, we cross the halfway part. So that's, of course, significant. That means that, half the class and more than half the material will have been covered by the time we get to the midway point. It also means it's time to start talking about the final project. We'll do that either late today or we'll do it on Wednesday. It's a prime example of don't procrastinate. People have done beautiful jobs on the final project, but nobody has ever done a beautiful job by doing it the weekend before it's due. So we'll talk about what we expect, give you some ideas. Welcome to bounce some of your ideas off of me or off of the class. We will do that formally in a final project proposal, but that's coming up. So as I said right before I turned on the recording, assignment 4, which was due yesterday, I received 6 solutions out of 17 students. The first 3 got graded and they were fine. I didn't have a chance yet to grade the others. So if you're not in that 6 of 17, you're late, and I don't know what you're waiting for to catch up. Pretty much for the next stretch of class, we're going to have 1 assignment per week. So you should expect that that's just the way it is. There's going to be something due every week. In general, the assignments follow numerically from each other. We will have coming up in 2 weeks a project, and we will talk about that a little later. So we should be able to confirm all of this. I got to move this thing down or something like that. It's taking up too much attention. So where are we now? Upcoming events. 19th, which should be this Sunday, assignment 5 is due. We will look at that real shortly. I have a slightly different take on it, but I can't rewrite the assignments. In my take, we've already sort of started on assignment 5, and I will show you why I'm saying that in a little bit. Week after, 2 things are due. The first project. As I think I've said before, you can expect that projects are more complicated and take longer to complete. They're also worth more. So don't think about blowing off a project. You got to blow something off, make it an assignment. Same day, the final project proposal is due. We'll talk a lot more about that. And it's really an opportunity. I've had students, for real, tell me that that was the highlight of the class. That's because they did a lot of work on their own and they learned a lot on their own, and they were proud of the results. So there are some good opportunities there. So why don't we start by doing a preview of assignment 5? And I'm pretty sure I'm in student mode, so you will see what I will see. Okay. Called temperature notification. Seems like we're in a rut here with temperatures. As I've said before, when you get a new assignment, you should kind of think of this as getting ready for your shopping trip to Home Depot. What tools do I need? What do I know? What do I know that I don't know? How am I going to go about learning what I don't know? How am I going to approach this a little piece at a time, so that when I build one piece of the project, I can check that it's working and then go on to the next piece. To stretch my Home Depot example, if you're going to build a house and you install the plumbing, it's into your best interest to test out the plumbing before the drywall goes up. Finding out after the drywall goes up that you have a plumbing problem or an electrical problem is not pretty. I guess the other way of looking at it is that your abilities to succeed in writing a program frequently depends on your upfront planning. Good planning, you'll figure it out. Flawed planning, you're going to have to backtrack. No planning, I'm betting it's going to give you considerable grief. So what's going on here? We can usually skip this whole big story up here. I don't know why they feel the need to write that much of a story, but this is the crux of it. We're going to take a temperature reading. You know how to do that, especially if you did assignment 4. You're going to take a temperature reading every time that I think button A is pressed, button 1 is pressed. And when you take that temperature reading, you're going to find out if it's in a certain range. Well, that's why I said we've already really looked at this when we looked at the automobile radiator temperature indicator. Now you have more ranges. The ranges are a little weird. I guess -50, somebody must live in who knows where. But these are ranges, and notice that they don't consider any decimal. So this range starts here and it ends here. The next range starts a degree above. So these things smoothly trace through a range from -50 to 150. Now, I want you to believe, and some of you do, that whatever the temperature is exclusive of any other temperature. So saying that in Python speak, this is an if, elif, elif, elif. It's not an if. There's no point once you figured out that the temperature is in the blue range of finding out if it's in the yellow range. It's not. It's in one of these ranges within the range of -50 to 150. So within that part of your decision structure, think if, elifs. And whether or not you want to put an else at the end doesn't really matter. It is true that if it's none of these, that it is the last one. But if you're happier writing each range out, that's fine. One other thing to remind you of is that ifs and elifs must have conditions after them that must evaluate to true and false. Else's never have a condition after them. It's the cleanup. Nothing above was true. So here's where I clean things up for the only other possible thing. Word of advice. Word of advice is one of the difficult things in this assignment are the two extreme ranges that flash. That's probably going to cause you some headaches unless you really have a good plan going in. That is not the crux of this assignment. The crux of this assignment is creating a color based on a temperature over a bunch of different ranges. So what I'm strongly suggesting you do is ignore the flashing until you have 4 ranges going and include the first and the last in that temporarily. So just make it blue, blue, yellow, green, red, red. Once you have that working, then go back and work on getting the extreme cold and extreme heat to flash. And if you don't succeed in the flashing and everything else is good, you're not going to lose that many points. So it's a good thing. Let's see if there's anything else here that we need to know. So you have a choice here. I strongly recommend the video. The video will kind of point you as to what should be going on. The only thing I'll say about the video is that Chuck runs this in a command window. It's not really necessary. You can run it in PyCharm. The only thing you can't do when you run it in PyCharm is, where's the extra credit? You can't clear the screen if you're running in Python and in PyCharm. I don't really care. I wouldn't worry a whole bunch about that. You can kind of fake it out if you want to, but it's not really the crux of what we're doing here. So what is the basics of it? The basics of it is to if you never. I find this a little strangely written, but that's okay. Tell the person what it is you expect them to do. And what you expect them to do is to put the temperature slider someplace. And when you are happy about that place, push button number 1. When button number 1 is pushed, then capture the temperature. We also need to do it in Fahrenheit and Celsius. This should be old news to you. Might as well use your convert.py file to do that. Once you capture the temperature, then put the appropriate LED to either solid or flash for 7 seconds. So that will acknowledge, record, and visually show what temperature range you were in, and then you exit. So that's the simple version of it. One and done, as I like to call it. For up to 5%, do all of the following. Well, it's not all or nothing because I don't care about clearing the screen. So let's say that you have this thing looping continuously. And you know how to do that, I hope. It's while true. So set up a while true loop. That's one level. And inside that, implement this, just as you had to anyway. But also implement the check of button number 2. So button number 2 is your way out. I'm not sure why you need a way out. If this is such a great program, you probably want to leave it running all the time and put the LEDs someplace hanging on the wall in your living room or on a coffee table so you can always see what temperature range it is. But nonetheless, this has the concept of let's use button 2 to exit the program. No mention here of maximum, minimum, and average, so you don't have to bother doing that work. It's not much effort to add this on to it. Probably the biggest thing is how and where do you handle button _2. If it were up to me, I would have this program run continuously. And I would also say that it's just as straightforward to do this in GUI 0 as it is in the simulator. So if you have some extra time, and you've got this done, you might want to play around with a program that truly runs continuously. Well, and you can do it with the simulator or you can do it in GUI 0. So what does that mean? That means that it looks a lot like the program that we did, I guess, last time or the time before with the radiator. You just drag the slider up and down and the right things happen to the lights. So you really have that template there for you already. The wrinkle that this adds to it, of course, is there's more ranges and there are 2 ranges that flash. So that's everything I have to say about this. Give me 10 seconds. I'm going to turn the fan on. There we go. Probably roll up my sleeves too. So, I mean, I'm tired of saying it, but I suggest that you get this program started now and finish early as opposed to waiting for the last minute. But I say it, not too many people listen. Questions on this assignment? What am I asking you to do? What do you not know how to do that you need to learn how to do? So you have a great opportunity to read this over again before Wednesday's class. And come Wednesday, when you read it in peace and quiet, it doesn't make sense to you, just let's talk about it together on Wednesday. Okay, so without any questions, let's go start looking at a few things. And the first thing I wanted to look at is the breakout discussion exercise that we had last time. Oh, so now that I'm here, this demo that we did here is pretty much breaking some range up into 3 sections and lighting an LED based on what section you're in. So here's your here's your while true to do it forever. Get the temperature. That temperature, I guess, is an integer. And then if else, if it's not normal, it's not overheated, it's warm. In this loop, while true loop, you should have a sleep statement that always executes, and that will keep your fan from cranking up in your computer and using a lot of CPU. So that's for this type of programming, this is a key to having your program behave nicely. And I made the note, small delay and infinite loop. All right, so in essence, I've already done the assignment for you. Not exactly, but almost. Or in the GUI 0 version, we did something very, very similar. The only thing we noted is that we had to build this whole thing here. And then the rest of it was not all that different. All right, so let's put that away. And let's go talk about, as a matter of review, let's find out what day it is today. It's here. Let's talk about what I asked you to do in the breakout room. Now, after the dust had settled, I'm pretty sure that we ended up with 1 breakout room with 2 people. So I'm not overwhelmed with the result, but I hope for those 2 people it was useful. And I hope for the others of you, I can show you pretty quickly what it was I was asking you to do. Multiplication table. So it's really important that give me a shout out if something I'm saying here seems weird or vague, or you'd like to hear more about it. And we'll just be short about it. We'll say print a multiplication. Yeah. Table. And it should be more there, but that's good enough. Now, what part of the assignment was to run this table for 9 columns and 12 rows. Well, with that piece of information, I'd like to have 2 global variables, because that's something fundamental about what I'm trying to do. Except my global variables are never going to be changed, which makes them global constants, except that Python has no enforcement of what a constant is. So the only thing it has is a convention that says that variables that are meant to never change should be named all in capital letters and frequently get put on top of all the functions. So I have that information. And now I know that I've been told that it's good practice to put everything in a main function. So I will. And I know that once somebody starts talking to me about rows and columns, the tool that comes to mind is nested for loops. And since there are only 2 dimensions, we only need 2 for loops, one nested in the other. So let's give it a try. And I'm going to kind of know where I'm going before, because of course I've done this already. And I'm going to say that I want to slowly go down the rows and quickly go across the columns. That's the way I'm going to create this. And that's because that's the way printing happens. It's really hard to print down a column, down all the rows and then forward to the next column. It's easier to do it the other way. So let's try that. So my rows direction is the Y direction. Nothing necessitates using Y, but why not? Well, how am I going to control this iteration? Range sounds good. And how many things do I have in the row's direction or the Y direction? Well, I've got rows, right? I created that already. And those of you who have done this and are looking ahead know I've made some mistakes already. So that's okay. Oh, I forgot a specification that I had given you. Print the sum of each row. There we go. So if I'm going to print the sum of each row, I need a variable, and I'm going to change it. It's truly a variable. And not only that, every time I start a new row, I better reinitialize that variable, or else I'm going to accumulate the total of everything. So here's a new variable called row total, and it's going to equal 0. And now it's time for my inner loop. Well, if I got the first one right, then this one is range of columns. And now I've got 2 loops and 2 indexes, X and Y. So now I'd like to calculate a new variable called product, because I'm doing a multiplication table. And that's simply equals to X times Y. If any of you still need to discover it, variable names are case sensitive. You can't, if you create something that has any difference in case, it's a different variable. So there's my product. And what about my row total? Well, my row total is equal to my old row total plus the product. So that's where I'm going to do my sum. And there probably should have been some, I lost my train of thought. Probably should have been some comments thrown in here to make this a little more easier to understand. But I basically now have a product and I have a row total. And what I want to do is I want to print this product, because I'm going across the row by quickly going through columns. So I will print the product. And I want to stay on this line. So I'm going to say, when you get done with printing, don't go to the next line, just put a new space in there. And when I am done with this row, then it's time to print the total. So that's going to be a print of row total. And let's see where we are. So I've also been told that it's good to put this funny looking if statement at the end of my program and a main. And I've been told it's good to have a single blank line at the end. PyCharm still has some critiques. I will reformat the file and life will be beautiful. See how long it took me to reformat the file, right? A good less than 5 seconds. That got me from 2 warnings to a green check mark. And a green check mark is a beautiful thing when it comes to any of the JetBrains products. It means you've done good. Doesn't mean you got it right, but it means that you've done pretty well and PyCharm can't figure out anything to complain about. If you want to use my new trick, set this to current file. You don't have to use this down here. Hit the run. Look for errors and look at the results and see if you're happy with what you see. So this is not, when you run a program for the first time, it almost is never one and done. This is my ideas being put together as quickly as possible to have something that I can test. Well, is it rectangular? Not quite, not visually yet, because some things take up 1 digit, some take up 2, and some take up 3. So I've got a formatting issue going on. Did I really want 0, 0? And the answer is not really. So why did I start with 0 in both of my loops? What caused that to happen? Now I get to take a little sip of seltzer while you think about it. Anybody see what caused this to start at 0 in both directions?
I'm guessing it's because you use the range function based off of the constants that you stated up top,
Yeah.
which for 9, it would be 0 through 8.
Yeah, so the default, if range sees an integer, the default is to start at 0 and finish at 1 less than the number in the integer in parentheses. So that's a problem. So we will tell it, well, no, how about you start at 1? And how about you go up to 9, not up to 8? So all we need to do is add 1 there, and we can solve that problem. If we solve the problem there, probably we can solve it the same way here. Okay. Now, if you don't appreciate how range works, you're missing a big opportunity. Now, I'm not saying every for loop should be done with range. Quite the contrary. If you don't need it, don't use it. But if you're going to use it, you need to understand that you can put 1 integer in there, and that means start at 0 and go to 1 less than. 2 integers, which means start at the first integer and stop at 1 less than the second. 3 integers, all of the above, but the third number is an increment. So if I only wanted even numbers, I would start at 0 and go 0, 2, 4, 6, 8 by incrementing by 2. So now that I've done that, let's go back and check. Are things looking up? Yeah, things are looking up. Here's your 1 through 12. Here's your 1 through 9. Here's the sum sticking out over here. It needs to be better formatted than that, but you can notice that in any row, here's my 5 times table. You should also notice that every time we move down a row, we add 45 to the total, which you might find interesting, or you might not. All right, we're almost done. We need some formatting. And we know by now that the key to good formatting is F strings, and the F stands for format. So we will set up an F string that starts here and ends here. Don't take that end into your F string. And we don't want to print the word product. That would be stupid. We want to print the value of the variable. So that means I take my variable or expression or literal and surround it in curly braces. And then after the name, but inside the curly braces, I can put a colon and a format specifier. And since the maximum number of digits I have here is 3, I'm going to space everything out as a 3-digit number. And this space over here will allow for the space between them. So that's what I propose doing. And then over here, I'm going to create another F string. Now, if you see strings ending in dot format, that's the old way of doing it. It's kind of the same thing, but it's clunky and you don't need to. F strings are a better way to go. But F really says, do what you're supposed to do with the dot format function. Now, that does not apply. That's not a function of the print statement. It's a function of strings. So if I want to create a formatted string, I can do the same thing. I can either use an F string or string.format. So don't think that it needs to be part of print. Frequently it is. So I need the total to be visually separated. For those of us who, don't know what's going on, we might as well give them a hint. And I'm going to do that by making the field wider. I'm going to make it a 5D instead of a 3D. Run the program again and hope that because I know about F strings, I've made an improvement. By default, numbers, whether they're integers or floats, are right justified. So that solves that problem. That's why everything here is right justified. Nothing is scrunched together. Even my biggest numbers have a space, and I've moved this over a little bit by saying 5D. So the only thing missing here is a header, so people know what's going on. And let's see what we can do. Well, if we're going to create a header, we're going to do it outside of the loops. The most dramatic thing that you need to recognize in this program is the nested for loop, and the fact that we're going quickly through the rows and slowly through the columns. So if you see that, then you've got the crux of what our repetition structure section has been about. Rest of it, you know, the expression is window dressing. If you don't get this of the indented loops, then you've missed the point of what we're doing. So let's give it a try. We're going to put a header on this. And of course, we're going to do it with an F string because we love our F strings. And what I want to do is I want to literally print multiplication table, and then I literally want to print the word total to mark that out. And when I run this, it's going to be less than impressive, right? So multiplication table should be centered here, and total should be over the total column. So what people who enjoy working hard do is they come over here and start going, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, run it again. Is that better? Well, it is, but it's not right. And, you know, you end up with something like that. Not cool, right? Not cool and not the way to do it. And if you were to submit this as, you know, something in an interview as the code that you wrote, it would just scream not cool. So we don't do that. We say, well, how are we going to use an F string? Well, I said that one of the things that can go in the curly braces is the literal. So let me create curly braces here and curly braces here, and not go down the road of counting things out, because I don't want to do that. But what I have in here is not a literal. It thinks that there are two variables called multiplication and table, and another variable over here called total. Those don't exist. You get a red line. So how do we create a literal? We put it in quotes. So we put a quote here, and 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 PyCharm is not impressed. The reason it's not impressed is I've closed my quote here, right? Here's the open, here's the closed. Here's the open, here's the closed. Here's the open, here's the closed. And this doesn't make sense. So I can't make literals by using single quotes, but fortunately, double quotes are fine. So if I'm trying to create a literal inside of a string, you got a choice. Your string becomes the single quotes and your literal becomes double quotes, or the other way around. Doesn't really matter. Now PyCharm is happy. And now we have to put multiplication table as a literal in the right place. So we know we need a colon. Now here you have to kind of eyeball it. I'm going to say that centered in 45, a 45 character wide field, I want to show this string. Let's see what that does. It centers it. Not exactly. Why didn't it come out as well as mine did? I thought I had this nicely centered. And I don't see why not, but that's okay. I can say, okay, 45 is too much. Let's bring it back to 40. And that's still a little too much. So this is the tweaking part. This is the, yeah, that's not bad, a little more. This is the user experience part. You want it to look nice. And the way to get it to look nice is to play with this thing enough to get it to be aesthetically pleasing. And now that we've done that, what's wrong with total? So the 38 took it out to here. Boy, I'm missing something. So this is centered. Total, we know, is going to take 5 spaces, regardless of what we do. And let's see what happens if we tell it to left justify that. See what we got. So because we've centered this, then we have to be missing something. I'm missing a step here. I guess I could bring my total column out farther. Let's do that. Let's bring the total column out. Cool. And now we can take this total and put it over that way and make this a little bigger by 2. And there we go. That's as good as it's going to get. So what have I done? I've got this thing now aesthetically not in bad shape. I've got 2 and a little bit over here, 2 and a little bit over here. This stands off nicely. I have headings, I have a table, and it's all good. So that's what, for those of you who did, thank you. Stay around to work on this in the breakout room. For those of you who didn't, this is the experience that you missed. The takeaway is to understand how to create a 2-dimensional space based on a column and row count, do stuff in there, format it, use F strings, and then play around with your format specifiers. The small gain here is to know that if you want to create literals inside of strings, use double quotes if your strings are marked with single quotes. Okay, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Questions? Another sip of seltzer. Is there anything you see here that you'd be concerned about doing if you were on your own? Anything here you want to talk more about? We've got the time. This is not a class that is pressed for class contact time. We have enough. Questions? Okay.
This might be a stupid question.
Never.
Where is the program getting the numbers from?
Okay, so here's the math, right?
So does the PyCharm just automatically know that?
Know what? The answer is
know how
no.
to-
PyCharm doesn't know multiplication tables.
Yeah, so then how is it getting its numbers?
Okay, so do you see that this is the answer, right? Product. We're trying to create a multiplication table, so we need to multiply an integer by an integer. So we create a variable called product. That goes on the left side of an equal sign. On the right side of the equal sign goes something that can be reduced to a single value, or something can be reduced to a value. In this case, a single value. Well, what is it? Well, let's click on the X and find a visual clue. The clue is this green X matches to this reddish X. So the value comes from executing a for loop with a range. What does range do? Range generates integer sequences. What's the first integer it generates? 1. What's the next one? 2. And it goes up to 10. So this says generate the integers from 1 to 10. And each time through the loop, call it X. Well, if you get that, then this is just the same thing for Y. But this generates integers from 1 to, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. Yeah, X is the columns, so it's 1 through 9. Y is the rows, and that's 1 through 12. So for loops are amazing things. They have something here called an iterator, and there are many different things that create iterators. One of them is the range function. They then loop as many times as necessary, each time assigning the value here to the index of the loop, where the first index is 1. Does that help?
Yeah, so the range is what's giving us our numbers.
Yeah, range is generating integers. The for loop is assigning the integers to the variable in the for loop. The name of that variable doesn't matter. Just make it something that makes sense to you.
Okay, I get it now.
Okay. And that's critical. I mean, it gets back to the fact that if you see an equal sign, you have to be able to figure out the value on the right and you assign it to the variable on the left. And that's just a little simplistic. In this case, that's all that's going on. We can assign tuples and lists and things like that. It doesn't have to be a single value. And of course, if we then try to do something to a variable that doesn't exist, PyCharm says, no. What are you telling me? This doesn't exist because I misspelled it. So PyCharm knows that things have to match up. It knows what you're going to need to do line 15, but it does not know, nor does Python know, about a multiplication table. At least Python knows about multiplication, but it doesn't know about a multiplication table. Okay? Other questions? So you probably should never say this is a dumb question, because it's not. If it's something that's confusing you, it's a good question. And it's much better to get it answered than to leave it floating around. All righty. Okay, I just want to go back and hit something quickly before it drifts off in our memory. And that is the prior breakout exercise that you had, which I have here someplace, but who knows where. So that's not what I want to show you. We've already done that. I think we looked at that last time. We did. This is what we looked at last time.
Yeah, I kind of got a question.
Go ahead, Walter.
So I made like a couple of sessions, but I'm like confused on what does like for and in do?
Okay, so for, if you see it in orange, PyCharm recognizes it as a Python keyword. So you could Google Python keywords and you'd find a list of words, in quotes, that are known to Python. For instance, DEF means define. For and in are two keywords necessary to make this kind of an iteration or repeated loop work. So for loops need for in. There's two different ways of using them, but they all use both of those keywords. Now there's something else that it needs. It needs a colon at the end. So and that's why you should not use for and in for your own variables, because you're just going to confuse things. So those are literally called the keywords of a language. And you can see def, for, in, if, and I don't see any other keywords. So print, interestingly, is not a keyword. Print is a function. So that doesn't qualify as a keyword. Did that help?
Yeah, but what about the range function? Is that?
Oh, the range function. So the range function, which I suggest that you could look up on the cheat sheet that's in the course, or you could Google. Range functions generate integer sequences. And they generate them in a way that is iterable, which means you can navigate through them. So the best way of learning about range is to practice, go for I in range 5, print I. And you'll see that the numbers that get printed are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And because it's in a for loop, each time that it increments is another time through the loop. So range generates integer sequences. They can go up, they can go down, and they can not necessarily generate every integer. They can skip them by having an increment other than 1. So as you'll see on the cheat sheet, there's 3 ways of doing it. There's a number only, which means start at 0. There's 2 numbers, which means start here, but end 1 less than here. And the third number in the range is the increment, which if you don't specify it is 1. Does that help?
Thank you.
Sure. Oh, I forgot what we were doing. That's okay. We were going to look at lab test results. One more time. Just to briefly review where we were here, we had 2 samples. We have 5 results for each sample. Because the sample got set to a lab and the lab was told, run the standard 5 tests on these. The range was given as 0.0 to 150.0. Some of these are integers, some of them not. I found out how long the list was. It better be the same number of tests run on both samples, or else the program kind of falls apart. So here we are again. For I, some index, in range, an integer generator, only one thing goes in the range, which is the number of tests. So don't get upset about the fact that it's number of tests minus 1. Remember that the default is to start at 0. So here, number of tests, and if I hover over it, it will tell me where it gets it from. It'll tell me it's an integer. It doesn't give me the results. There are other ways of finding that out. Number of tests in both cases is going to be equal to 5. So what is this loop going to do? It's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Start at 0 default, end in 1 less than this number. That's the way it behaves. And a default increment of 1. So if you need to count on your fingers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, you'll find that you will have done it 5 times, and that's really convenient. Well, this seems to have kind of blown my thing about what I've said about equal signs. We've said in the past, do what you have to do on the right of the equal sign. Well, what does that mean? What do I have to do with those 5 numbers, comma separated? And the answer is I can make a tuple out of them, because that's what a tuple is. It's either looks like that or it looks like this. One or the other, it doesn't matter. If you're lazy, leave it out. Again, on your interview sample that you're going to give somebody, I would show off that you know that you can leave them out. Also, there's no reason to necessarily make this into a list, because you're never going to change the items. In other words, you don't need the mutability of a list. So don't do that either, because you don't have to. Does it matter for the execution of the program? Not really. So, and of course, be consistent. Don't be inconsistent. Well, I can hover over sample 1, and PyCharm will tell me that it's a tuple. We just talked about that. And it will tell me the tuple is composed of a combination of ints and floats. So there's nothing to require you to have the same type of variable inside of a list or a tuple. As a matter of fact, you could put strings here, but that would cause LabCorp major problems. So if you saw a string here, something bad has happened. So what are we going to do? Well, this only goes in one direction. We're going to figure out the average of each of these tests. So we're going to run this sample. We're going to run we're going to run the sample through 5 tests that we've already got the results here. And then inside the loop, I'm going to capture something and call it result 1. Well, what is that? It's sample sub I, sample 1 sub I. So I here represents the index. Nothing sacred about using I. I could have used index. I could have used frog. It doesn't matter. So go to the ith element, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Go to the ith element, plug it into a variable, go over to the other list, plug it into a variable, figure out that you don't have to do your own average. You can use the mean function, part of the statistics library. it wants a list. It probably would also take a tuple. So I used square brackets just because it made it stand out a little better. Take the mean of these two numbers, plug it into a new variable, and then inside of the loop, print out a nice table. So that gave us this. And it's pretty nice. It's got a heading up here, which we spaced out. Looks like we put 2 spaces here, which is not cool, but that's okay. We got it spaced out, we got it centered, and we also have our row headings, which we generated someplace here. So first thing we did was the test number, then we did the first result, and notice the color matching. You can click and see exactly where these things are coming from, or if you made a mistake, where they should have come from. So first sample, second sample, and average, and that's what gets printed here, and we be done. So I didn't mean to make a review out of this, but it's not a bad idea. What I wanted to do is I want to show you a different way of handling this. It's on your cheat sheet, but it's very easy to miss, and it's also a little confusing, I think. So we will take 5-10 minutes and look at a zip demo. So what is this? This is a demo of the zip function. And at this point, I was getting lazy. So I didn't put a header on here. I don't have nice row and column titles. I just have data. So this should look familiar, right? We got 2 samples, we have tuples, we have the number of samples, we have a for loop using range, and we print these things out. So that's a simpler table, but that's okay. And let's just take a look at what that does. So that's the stuff up at the top. Well, there's an easier way to, well, there's a different way to do it. I'll let you decide whether it's easier. I can use the zip function. Well, that's much different than using the range function, isn't it? The zip function, try to follow it carefully or read about it when you have a chance, because I've always found it a little confusing. The zip function generates an iterable, and that's good because that's what needs to follow the word in. What is that iterable that it generates? Well, an iterable happens to be a tuple that's formed by zipping up each combination here. So as many of these as you have, the first thing that it will generate is the tuple 14 and 15. Then it will generate this tuple. Then it will generate this tuple. Then it will generate this tuple without needing the word range. Well, okay, what happens if this is what happened? It will only go up to 16. So it'll only include things that match. Now it'll go up to 17. If that doesn't match, now it will go up to 16. So it automatically creates tuples essentially by going down the columns. And what are we going to do with those tuples? Well, we're going to store them in 2 new variables, A and B. And we're going to format them out to something nice. And then we're going to calculate the mean by creating a list of A and B, because the assignment said, give me the average of each test. Oh, no, I'm sorry, give me the test average for each sample. So here are my samples. And here, so I could have called this something with the word sample in it, but I can't duplicate this name here. And what does that give you? Gives you exactly the same thing. So this and this yield the same results. We should note that if we use zip, we don't even need this line. So if I take this line out, I got an error over here, but this still runs. And if you really need me to make the point, I could comment this out. Run the program, and I don't need this variable because zip doesn't need the variable. These are not indexes, these are values from the zip. So in the first case, the values are 14, 15. If I had 3 of them, that would be fine. I would just have to receive them here as 3 different things. All right, so which is better? I don't know. Zip is not what people typically learn at first. It's there, it's available, it's kind of cool. I think it would definitely get you brownie points in an interview. That means good. I'm not sure where the expression brownie points came from. And I would say it's somewhat simpler, but you have to know what zip does. Okay. So there be your zip demo. Questions about zip? You get it? You don't get it? You wish you never heard about it? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
All good here.
Okay. So, this is the trip to Home Depot. Now, of course, in Home Depot, you could get zip ties. It's another tool, and it's not a secret. It's on your cheat sheet, albeit a little hard to understand what the point he's making, but it is on the cheat sheet, and there's probably a gazillion internet hits you would get if you Google Python zip function or just Python zip. So the cool word for the day is iterable, or generates an iterator. It's something over which you can scan. And we will get to the point someplace, I'm not sure where, where we're going to find out that strings are iterables. What are you iterating over? You're iterating over every character in the string. So if we go back to what we were just looking at before, and we look at this string, this is the 0 index of the string up to the length -1. So this string over here has 5 indices, 0 through 4. And we can use that in a range. We can use that to iterate through the characters in the string, which is great if your program needs to do string manipulation. So that's cool. All right. It is about time for a break. Let me just tell you where we're going after the break.
Quick question.
Yes.
After multiplication table, I'm glad you came back to this one because I just want to know, what's the S mean? Like,
String.
what is this? Okay, students for string. Okay.
Yeah, S just means string. The common ones are D for integers or digits, S for strings, F for floats, G for try to make the best sense you can out of a number. And again, hit the internet and look up Python format specifiers. There are carets, meaning centered. This is justified to the right. The other way is justified to the left. There's embed 0 commas into big numbers. There's, after this colon, there's a whole wild and wonderful world. You just need to do enough research to get it to do what you want it to do. But it's the way to go. I noticed at least one of you tried in formatting out the assignment to use \T for tab. Yeah, it works, it tabs, but eventually something's going to be different enough length that the tab isn't going to do what you want it to do. So real formatting, this is where to go. The other place to go that I tried and then I took out is string. Remember, I said strings have a dot format function associated with them. They also have a dot center format. So you can say string dot center and then in the parentheses put how many spaces do you want it centered. And that'll work just fine, but it kind of is a different style. All right. Anything else? Always feel free to come back and ask questions about stuff that we've done in class, in breakout, for exercises. That's what learning is. It's the circling back to make things more clear that weren't clear in the beginning. Okay, so last time we did this. We decided to collect pledges until a goal is reached, print the number of pledges and the pledge total when done. And what we found out here is that there are all kinds of ways for the user to screw this thing up. And we also discussed that correcting user error through electrocution or firing squad is socially unacceptable. So we had to learn about how to protect our program against user error. And what we found is we found a thing called try except, where we could say, if you get a value error, then handle it. Tell the person to do that. We learned about while true to trap somebody in a loop until they got it right. And that's what we did over here. And we informed the user in both cases that they had done something wrong. So that's how far we got. What we're going to do after the break is create a new copy of this and change what we're doing. Instead of collecting donations until the goal is reached, we're going to collect donations until the person collecting them gives up. So there won't be a goal. You know, either they're not too ambitious, you know, they need to go home to feed the dog, walk the dog. There won't be a goal, but now we've created another problem that how does the user going to say we're done? And that's what we're going to handle. Okay. Is there anything else I want to say about that? I don't think so. So let's be a little generous. Let's make it 10:15. And we will come back and create donations2.py, change our heading, take out the goal statement, and think about how we can deal with what we're going to deal with. And maybe you want to think on break about if there's no goal, how is the user going to say we're done? He's done, she's done. How are they going to say, okay, that's enough, get me off this phone. I don't want to do pledges anymore today. All righty, so 10:15 is our target. I'm going to go grab a little snack. And at this point, we can. All right, so the recording is back. We had some discussion over the break about class videos. So since there is that discussion, let's take a look and let's see what we can find. Under content, at the bottom, there's a link that says Zoom recording playlist. And that's there because all of my Zoom sessions, unless I screw it up, all of my Zoom sessions are recorded. If you've ever used this, what happens after you shut down the Zoom session, they create an MP4 file on your computer or in the cloud. You can upload that to YouTube and you can take the recordings and make a playlist from it or create a link. So in here in chronological order are the Zoom class recordings. This process takes a little while, depending on when we get done. It's either going to get done before lunch or shortly after lunch, unless I'm called away to do something. Now, my only indicator here of participation, obviously, is how many views have there been of these videos. So that's where they are, and they should work as well as could be expected. You still got to listen to me fumble through things, but that's what we got. Make sense? We're good?
Yep.
Okay, so let's move forward. We were going to create donations2.py. Before we do that, it occurred to me that it might be good to let the person know while they're trying to reach their goal, what their current pledge total is. So I included that over here in a simple F string. So yeah, so the way this program works now is, and I should probably tell them, probably tell them up front what their goal is. So a donation comes in for $50. and it says, you've currently got $50. Yeah, it really needs to say what the goal is. And then they get distracted and they type in -8, and it says, no, the number must be positive. So then they still get distracted and they type in frog, and it says, no, it must be an integer. And then we just hit enter and it says, no, it must be an integer. And then we get a $55 pledge. And now we're finished. You met your goal. The number of pledges was 2. The total was 105. We just didn't tell the user what the goal is, but we could correct that. So we spent a lot of time in this program making it bulletproof. We don't have an unreasonably large pledge, but we don't have a negative pledge either. So that's about the best we can do. Best I could do. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to put it in today's folder, which is the 13th. And I'm going to change the name to donations to. And I'm going to close this one before I make a mistake and start working on the wrong one. And I'm going to get things caught up here a little bit. This is the 13th. And we're going to change the assignment. The assignment is going to say, collect as many donation pledges as you can. So why don't I start this with a blank program or a template program? And the answer is, I have a feeling that a lot of what I've got here is relevant. So I'm going to use this as a starting point. I'm not going to wipe over what I have. I'm going to save that. But I'm going to use this as a starting point. And now I'm going to start looking for what needs to get modified. So first thing is obvious. There's no goal. So this comes out. And that creates an error. And this no longer is going to say the pledge is less than the goal. It's going to say stay here forever. And what else has to be changed? You have met your goal. Now, why is that highlighted? Oh, the code is unreachable. That's a bad thing. Okay, so yeah, good for you, PyCharm. I appreciate you more with each passing day. Agree or disagree? Is line 31 unreachable?
Yes.
Yeah, here's a while true. Here's a break, but remember, and this is kind of important, break only gets you out of the innermost loop. So this break will get you out of this loop. There's no way out of this loop. Well, that kind of makes sense because we've now changed what we want to do to say collect as many donations as you can. And I guess if we were seriously going to play hardball with that, then maybe we put these things in here and never let the person out. But, you know, that's kind of cruel, a little bit like the, you know, electrocution and firing squad for user input error. So we need a plan, and this is a planning phase. We need a plan that says, how does the person get out of continuing to collect pledges? So any ideas?
We would need like an action to like Control C, except if
Yeah.
It-
Yeah, we obviously there has to be a keyboard interaction. And we probably could investigate that. And it probably shows up as some kind of an exception, which we could handle. Interesting idea. I haven't done it though. So one of the things that we could do easily is we could say, we could go back to this idea of a negative number and just say enter amount pledged or -1 to quit. And that works. We could test it. It's a little clunky. I'm going to go with this. I'm going to say enter amount pledged or enter to quit. And apply that. That means the enter key. Okay. So there's the plan. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen if they just press enter? That's going to cause an exception because a null string or a blank string can't be converted to an integer. So there's an indication that, yeah, the person didn't just screw it up as an integer, they really want it out of here. So that means that maybe I can do some more work down here and separate those two cases. So one case is you screwed up, and the other case is you want out. So so where does that result of that input end up? It ends up in a variable called pledge. So what about down here if we tried this? If not pledge. And then, of course, we're going to talk. Because this doesn't make much sense yet. Okay, so for better or worse, this code is now reachable. And it's reachable because of line 29. Obviously, line 29 is a break. The inner loop that it's involved in is up here. That's the way out. This we have over here. This has an indentation problem. Let's fix that. And it's not thrilled with what's going on here. It says the local variable pledge might be referenced before assignment. And its suggestion is to add a global statement, which is not quite necessary. So let's give this a try and see how far we can get before we regret what we've done. All right, so $50 donation. Current pledge total is $50.78. -5. Nope, must be positive. And of course, this never ends. So when I hit enter, let's see what happens. Well, it says, please enter an integer. That was not a shining success. What happened? Well, this failed because it couldn't convert it to an integer. So that's what got triggered here. And that's not exactly helpful to us. So we need to find out that nothing has been entered. And we need to know that nothing was entered. The problem is that, remember the story, this turned out to be the most valuable lesson for this class. What an equal sign means. Do what you can do on the right side of the equal sign and assign the value to the variable on the left. Well, I tried to take the integer of an input and I got an exception. Therefore, I never assigned a value to pledge. Therefore, pledge might be referenced before it was assigned. So there you are. PyCharm was right. This is not a good program because of that. And it doesn't work right either. So my suggestion is that we break this up into 2 steps. Let's see if we can get away with that. So let's call this the reply. And let's just except a string. Okay, so that's going to work. Whether it's a number, a string, a negative, a nothing, we're going to get the reply. And then what we're going to do is we're then going to set pledge to be the integer of the reply. So this is going to succeed. It has to. This is going to fail. And that's okay. Because if we can't, we can't. And if this is empty, then it's empty. Now it's still not happy over here, but let's give it a try and see what the behavior is. Okay, so 50 and 70 and -7. No, can't do that. And frog, can't do that. And enter. Not quite. It says, please enter an integer. So we're still not there. And what is the what happened here? What is this pledge and why is it not tripping this out? So let's find out. Let's go over here and print pledge. So this is a very old-fashioned technique of debugging programs. Put a print statement where you need some more information and see what happens. So the question is, let's put in a real number like 50. And then let's hit enter. And did we get an exception? Yes, we did. But what was pledge equal to? It was equal to 50. So that's not cool. What about if we tried this to do this first? Just hit enter. And it says, you referenced a variable before assignment. So we're not quite there. What we have to do is we really have to answer PyCharm's suggestion or criticism. We got to answer PyCharm's criticism about this variable. So we've probably gotten what we're going to get out of this. So let's take this out. And let's see, what about if every time we came back here, what's the problem? The problem is that reply was still set to the previous number. And when this failed, pledge never got updated. So what about if we make sure that reply is set to nothing every time we come back to the top of this? So there's subtle differences between quote, quote, and none. But let's just go for saying that the reply was just set to nothing because the person hit enter. And that's what we're looking for. And this says we never use the word reply. Why is that? Oh, it's this that we wanted. I'm sorry. Yeah, this shouldn't have been pledge. This should have been reply. So let's do that. Let's take this out of here for a minute and see if we have an error or not. We do. So this should have been reply. We have the same problem. And I propose as an answer to that to initialize it before, initialize it every time we go through the loop. That is the proposed answer. So are we happy? Well, we got a green check mark. So things are looking up. Okay, so let's just hit enter at first and see what happens. Well, you have met your goal. Well, clearly that should have gone, right? So this line comes out. Let's run it again. hit enter. We got no pledges and no dollars in. All right. So far, so good. 50, 75, -7. Nope, must be positive. Frog. Must be an integer. Hit enter. We're done. We had 2 pledges of $125. So that's of. Oh, current, okay, yeah, 50 and 75. There we go. So that's pretty much a success. And it was a little tricky because we really had to face up to the fact that PyCharm was telling us the truth, that there was something wrong with this. So let's go back and take a look at how we solve this. Notice that all of this confusion, discussion, and iterations came up because we changed the business. We now say collect as many donation pledges as you can. And that's a fair thing to say. We just needed to figure out how to write it. And what we found out is that we had to get the input. If we didn't get a reply, then we couldn't deal with it. So if we went back to number 1, program donations number 1, we noticed that when we got this number, it was all in one line. And if this failed, it failed. Well, that didn't do us very well here. We need to get a value for this because we need to test it. So once we have this value, then we can go ahead and convert it to an integer, which may or may not work, but that's okay. But we know at that point that reply exists. So if we can't convert it, then we get a value error just like we did before. And what we haven't talked about yet is what does this mean? Well, let's talk about the result. The result of that being true is that we break out of the loop that we're in, which is the main loop up here. So this is our way out. Well, what does line 31 mean? It seems to be missing some kind of comparison. So remember, the key about if and elif statements is there must be a condition and it must evaluate to true or false. Well, would anybody want to speculate how if not reply would end up to be true or false? And it's kind of a trick question. And if you don't like that question, you could just try this one. What does that mean, if reply?
So with if reply, if the value comes back as reply, then it moves on to the next line, which would be break, which means if not would be everything excluding reply
Yes.
would cause it to apply the following condition.
Yeah, but what does if reply mean? Forget about the break. How would you convert line 31 into English? Isn't it missing something? If reply what? Certainly not equals sunny, right? So let's go back and look at reply. Where does it come from? It comes from here. What do we know about reply? Well, if you're curious, hover over something and see if PyCharm will help you. It says you have a string, and at this very moment, that string will be empty before line 18 gets executed. So we know we have a string. If reply means that if reply will be true if the string is not empty. So let's try that again. And actually, I could probably break this. I could certainly turn this around, which is probably a better way of doing it. It is. Let's turn it around. Let's take this line. I hope this works okay. Put this over here. Let's take this line, put it over here. I know there are better ways of doing this, but when I try it, it never works out. Okay. So if there is something in the string and you couldn't convert it to an integer, then this is the case. If there was nothing in the string, then this will be false and you will break. So what I hadn't told you until now is that asking if reply will test whether the string has anything in it. And if it does, it will be true. Now this gets more exciting. If the list has anything in it, the name of the list will be true. If the list or a tuple or a dictionary or a set is empty, then the name of it will be false. If you write this, it will work, but you've shown yourself off to be a newbie. And PyCharm is going to say, why don't you simplify this? So when I go ahead and do that, oops, when I go ahead and do that, oh, reformat? No, I thought it said more actions. Replace Boolean expression with reply. There we go. So you never say equals equals true. That's a giveaway that you don't appreciate Python. If you say if a variable name is true, then you're asking if it's a string, does it have something in it? If it's a list, tuple, dictionary or set, then it must have something in it for it to be true. So true and false has some other meanings in Python, which is kind of nice because you kind of get the feeling that this is what this is doing. If you do have a reply, and let's just make sure we haven't messed this up. And let's also test the initial thing where the person does nothing. All right, so far, so good. And nothing. Okay. So what I've done here, which is very important, is every time I make a change, I go back and retest. If you can really convince yourself that what your change is isolated to one part of your program, then just test that part. If you can't, go back and test everything that can be tested. It's good practice. So far, so good. But let's try something. What happens if we enter, we're not quite looking here, and we enter a space or two and then hit enter? It says enter an integer. Well, I wanted to get out, and the only thing I did wrong is I happened to hit a space. So what is the string? Is the string empty? Yes or no? Is reply empty?
No.
No. What does the reply have in it? What's the content of the variable? The value of the variable?
Space.
Space. So no, it's not lying. This is what it says it is. Reply is true. And this is a much better way of doing it than the not. I mean, it's equivalent, but there's just fewer words here. It's easier to sort this out. So it is true. Reply is true. It has a space. And maybe you're going to take the attitude of, tough. I told you to hit enter and you put a space in there. If we want to be a little kinder, we can look at another string function. See, there are tons and tons of string functions. You could spend the rest of the semester learning about all of these different string functions. But the one we want is called strip. And can we get anything if we hover over it? Leading and trailing white space removed. Well, if you haven't run across it, white space are things like spaces and tabs. And what else causes white space? I can't think of anything else other than spaces and tabs. So it removes leading and trailing spaces and tabs. Cool. So now if we get a donation of $67 and we hit a couple of spaces, we have stripped them out. And this will now be interpreted as an empty string because we've stripped it out. All right, a lot of good stuff here. out of a pretty silly a project here of collecting donations, we've run across a lot of things, and I like those kinds of programs. They kind of give me a chance to get some mileage out of them and keep them going and keep making them better. So we have just a few minutes. Let's quickly go through this. Remember, the goal here was to count how many pledges and accumulate the pledge total. So in D2L, we were asking the question about counters and totalizers. That was where we started. Then we said, if we want this to go forever, we're going to set up a while true loop. And then we found we got tangled up in this mess here, saying that we need to get the input so we know how to get out of here. So we didn't do this in one line, we did it in 2 lines. And we needed to make sure that this thing was initialized before we did it, so we put this up here. Then we said that, okay, if we can't convert this to an integer, if you can't convert ply to an integer, you're going to get a value error. Down here, we dealt with it. We dealt with it in 2 ways. One is to say, you typed something in, but it wasn't an integer. And the other is to say you didn't type anything in, or what you typed in was just blank, either one or the other. So strip did. So break. So here's the way out. Here's how the person, that's the person's exit ticket out of here. If you got to line 21, then we wanted to make sure that it was a positive donation. And probably we shouldn't use the word positive if we were trying to help the person collecting the pledges. But anyway, if it was greater than 0, then it was cool and we broke out of a loop. What loop? This loop. PyCharm is showing you with that light gray line where your loop is. So break out, and then here is what we do with a counter. We increment it. And here's what we do with an accumulator. We do a plus equals, and that keeps a running total. And then we used the F string to print out some text in green, curly brackets for the variable, which is not highlighting for some reason. There it goes. And then we threw a new line in over here, \n. And that's it. We did use some tabs over here, since everything is, there's nothing variable before this table quite work to set this in. That's what we did, and we be done. All right. Questions about this program? A little tricky, right? But
I am absolutely going to watch through this again just to pick up on the finer points.
okay, so the point is that PyCharm was trying to help us all along. Very rarely is PyCharm going to lead you down a wrong path. It happens, but not very rarely. You might as well assume that it's trying to help you. And you should also assume that if your program has a green check mark up here, it's better than a program that doesn't. And it's also will make me happier if I get your program and it has a green check mark. Other questions, comments? If not, I will